In this segment, we're gonna skin the blank and do the bottom contours. After you get the outline that you want, the next step that I typically do is it's called skinning it. And if you see the blank right here, when the foam comes out of the mold, it's gonna have this quote unquote skin. If you hit it with sandpaper or anything like that, it doesn't come off as easily as the rest of the foam will. So if you were hitting all of this with sandpaper, this would not come off as easily as this. So you take the planer or something like that, and you're just gonna take a thin layer off of everything, and that planer will pull up the skin. I like the planer the best, but then if I didn't have the planer, I would use the Surfoam. Part of the reason I think is because block of wood and sandpaper is still gonna have a little bit of play, whereas the Surfoam is straight steel, so it'll just cut right through that. But if you don't have a Surfoam, you're gonna want to get a block of wood and the most aggressive sandpaper you can find. Typically it's around a 36 or 40, and you just wanna take a thin layer off the whole board with that sandpaper. To use the planer here, the first layer you're gonna set, and you're gonna take a certain depth off, as little as you can take off. And then the second pass, what you're gonna do is you're going to keep the tail end of the planer on the piece that you already cut. That way that the whole planer won't go deeper than what you've already cut. Here I'm checking the thickness because I need to start thinking about that overall goal I have of getting this board down to 2.5 inches thick. So I gotta see where I'm at right now. I gotta keep in mind that I have to skin the top, and that'll take off a little bit. And then I also have to keep in mind that I'm gonna put the bottom contours in, and that'll take off a little bit more as well. When you're talking about the bottom of a surfboard, you got 3 things that are all working together. You have the bottom contours, you have the rocker, the fin placement and the fin angle, and the rails. You got all those components kind of working together. So now that we're gonna put the bottom contours in, we gotta kind of check all those things. The rails are gonna come last, so we don't need to check that. I also need to check the rocker and see if it's where I want it to be. So I'm gonna put the bottom contours in that I want right now after I skinned it, because I'm not really taking that much off the blank. And what I'm gonna take off is basically gonna be in the contours. So I'm gonna put just a straight single concave in there. Basically what a single concave is gonna do is produce the feeling of lift. So basically we're putting in a concave like this, just one single concave like this. Just kind of that all the way out. And when you're riding, it's just gonna be, because this and this is gonna be higher, so there's gonna be more lift. We wanted to measure out the rocker here, and you're gonna wanna place a straight edge on the center of the board. You can do this with a level that's long enough, or really any type of straight edge. So you have metal piece, if you're using wood, you gotta make sure that it is actually straight. And then basically what you're gonna do here is just measure from that piece of wood down how far, and that's gonna be your rocker right there. So this is the tail, and we're looking at 2.5 inches of rocker right there. 2.5 is a really good standard amount of tail rocker. I typically ride flatter boards. In San Diego here, California, you get a little bit not as hollow and steep waves as Hawaii or some of those other places. So you want a flatter board. Here I'll put the concave in. Typically I go about 16 inches back from the nose. Right about there. That's kind of where it's going to start. The last 2 inches or so you want flat. Then I'll typically starts to taper it off right where the fin is, or the front of the back fin. That's where it starts to taper off. Here I'll use the planer to get the rocker to where we want it to be, and then I will put in the concave. You know kind of that when you have the planer all the way open, how much you're taking off. So you can kind of get a gauge there. And so right here I'm putting in the concave, the single concave, and so I'm just slowly opening it, and then when I'm in the middle, I want that all the way open because that's where it's going to be the deepest, and that's where I'm going to want to take down the most foam. So I'm slowly opening and then open all the way, and then I'm closing as I go out the tail. So that's kind of how you get that flow, that even lines that we were talking about. Here I'm going to measure it with the level and kind of see how much concave I'm putting in there. After you use the planer and you feel comfortable with the amount of concave that you put in there, you're going to start blending the lines. So if you have any planer lines that aren't exactly even, you can just take a block and some sandpaper here and blend those lines. This is kind of where, in my head, I just kind of picture the water flowing over the bottom of the board. The water is going to be contacting this, and you want to have it so it's smooth, and so the water just flows off the back of the board. That's going to give you some speed. Here again, I'm going to use the level and check and see if I have enough concave in there, and to see if each side is even. And you can see right here that there's a high spot in the stringer, so I need to take this planer right here, this little wood planer, and shave off some of that stringer. You know, a stringer is going to be a lot harder than the foam, a lot denser, so it's going to want to stay. If you're hitting wood and foam with sandpaper, you're going to take off a lot more foam before you take off the wood. Yeah, so I'm really fine-tuning it, and you can see here it's a lot more even, and really the concave here is not extreme. You know, when I first started, I used to go pretty extreme, and I'd put 1/4 of an inch or even more single concave, double concave. I was like, I need a lot of concave, but really you don't need that much to feel it. You'll feel 3/16 of an inch in a concave. I'm measuring the board here because I want to make sure I'm getting to my goal of that 2.5 inches. That's my overall goal, and I still have to keep in mind that I have to skin the top here. I don't want to take that much off because I want that denser foam up on the top. You're only taking a small amount off the top. You want to leave that denser foam as much as you can. So this is really, maybe you're taking a 1/16 of an inch off, and you're leaving all that other dense foam on there so you don't get those pressure dings when you stand on it. So when you're turning the knob here, you're really just barely turning it to skin it. And you'll see it when you play with it. You're just quickly cleaning up the skinning. If you're really good at the planer, you shouldn't have to do this at all, but for me, I still like to clean it up just a tiny bit, just so everything's smooth and clean to work with when you start doing the rails. Typically, you'll get a lot of volume up in the nose, and a lot of this is going to be wasted volume because it's not going to be in the water at all, so it's just weight up there, and you're going to be taking down this extra volume. I would typically do this from the bottom, but I already have the rocker that I want in the bottom, so up here I just got to make sure that I'm taking down this extra volume in the nose on the top. This is what makes this blank a second. It has this gash right here, so it can't really be sold as a normal quality, so they discount it and they sell it for less, and you just have to cover this up basically, but that's what makes it a second. So we're blowing it off here, and then you can compare the nose here. This is the board that I broke in half that I really like, so you can see how thinned out it is. That's kind of what we're going for with the nose there.